Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you with HIT 445. We are talking about quality management. This is still week one. This is video 3 out of 4, and it's on chapter 3, Identifying Improvement Opportunities. And if you are following along in your book, you'll want to be on page 39. Our learning objectives are there in the book for you. And they're also here on the screen. So you can read through those together if you'd like. Before we get too far into here, if you look on page 39, you'll notice that step 1 is identify performance measures. Step 2 is identify the customers. Step 3, identify customers' actual requirements. And then step 4 is asking the question, do the outcomes of the current process actually meet the customer's requirements? This cycle is what we are going to be studying in this chapter, and this is what you'll need to know for the quiz, hint, hint, hint. So make sure that you know those steps, what they mean, and we will really quick go through them here on the slides. So the foundations of caregiving really fall into kind of four applicable areas. First one is buildings, next one is equipment, then there's professional staff, and the last is appropriate policies. And these are the areas that you will want to consider when you're doing performance improvement. So let's go on and define what is a process and what is an outcome. A process is an interrelated activity in a healthcare organization that promotes effective and safe patient outcomes across services and disciplines within an integrated environment. An outcome is the final result of care, treatment, services in terms of the patient's expectations, needs, and quality, which may be positive and appropriate, or, unfortunately, sometimes negative and diminishing. So as I said, there are 4 steps here that we need to know about the continuous improvement monitoring, steps to success that they cover here in chapter 3. We've got to identify performance measures, identify the customers for each process, identify the customer's actual requirements with respect to the outcomes of those processes, and then step 4 would be asking the question whether the current processes actually meet the customer's requirements. So now we're going to talk about process measures versus outcome measures. And if you look in your book, this is the bottom of page 40, top of page 41. It goes through there and it defines what is a process measure versus what is an outcome measure. And the example that they give you is if someone needs an OIRF, open reduction internal fixation, meaning that they've had some kind of a fracture and an orthopod needs to take them to surgery, open them up, put the bone back into place, fix it somehow, usually with screws or a plate and screws, things like that. And then they close them back up. That's an open reduction internal fixation. So a process measure is giving antibiotics immediately prior to performing that surgery. That's a process measure. Antibiotics administered immediately prior to an ORIF. An outcome measure would be looking at the number of post-op wound infections that occurred following ORIF procedures, and then looking at whether or not those patients were given those antibiotics. Some more examples are listed for you down at the bottom of page 41 on table 3.1. And I would really make sure that you're familiar with and understand the difference between a process measure, which is just a process, something that is done, versus an outcome measure, which is something that results from a process or function being performed or not performed. Moving on to page 42, there's benchmarking, and again, they define benchmarking for you, and also talk about sentinel events. And the reason that they're bringing all these up is that these are ways that you start to find out what needs to be improved, whether that's a system, a process, an outcome. Is that from benchmarking and figuring out, ooh, we're really far off from where we should be? Or is it a sentinel event, something that happened that involves significant injury to or the death of a patient? And often, to find some of these things, you look at high volume, high risk, or problem-prone areas. And I think I don't know if we talk about it here or maybe we talk about it a little further on. We'll see. Anyway, the customers. How do you identify your customer? Well, who is receiving the outcome or the end product? It can be an internal customer, meaning someone who's already within the organization, or it can be an external customer, someone who comes in from outside the organization and receives that outcome or end product. In both cases, whether you're talking internal or external customers, the services be provided within the organization, from the organization, that sort of thing. In order to figure out the customer's actual requirements, you need to look at what factors are most valued by the customer. And these can vary and these can change over time. And it really, you can see how knowing who your customer is can change what the requirements are. If your customer is a physician, their requirements may be very different than a patient or than an employee in a specific department. But then again, one of the examples they give you is good tasting food at the right temperature. Everyone wants that, whether you're an employee going to the cafeteria, a physician who's trying to grab something to eat before they go into surgery or have something else going into a meeting, a patient family member who's visiting their loved one at the hospital. They all want good tasting food, but it's very different when you talk about charts available for physician completion. The patient doesn't really care about that. Someone in maintenance or housekeeping or even a nurse on the floor may not care about that, but HIM sure will, and physicians will. So you just got to see who's the customer. And then the last question, are end products actually meeting those customer requirements? Well, how do you figure that out? You've got to know, first of all, what is the end product or the service? How are you measuring it? And then what is the customer's requirement and how does it compare? And sometimes the customer's requirements change, and if you don't ask what is the customer's requirements now versus what were they before, and are they going to change in the future, those end products and whether or not you decide you're going to pursue PI activities can really change. So if the customer's requirements haven't changed and the end products are meeting the requirements, then you don't need to do PI activities right now. But if it's no, then a PI team can be formed to take a look at that. Or you may find that you just need to tighten up your education or do education, that maybe education was performed 2 or 3 years ago, but there's been staff turnover and there's been other things and people have forgotten and it's time to re-educate. It really just depends. So what are some QI toolbox techniques? And this is starting at the bottom of page 44 in your textbook, where it talks about brainstorming, affinity diagrams, nominal group technique. I'm not going to go through those in a whole lot of detail here on this video because you've got those in your book. You can read through them. You can see the figures that are examples of those. And then they give you some check your understanding questions. And the example they're giving here is registration for day surgery. And that is on page 47 in your textbook. So again, I'm going to move through these slides, but it is in your textbook and it's there for you if you want to go through that. And that is actually it for this chapter. And we will be back shortly to talk about chapter 4, using teamwork and performance improvement. Thank you.